Okay, so this video is talking about Amazon. Now, I did a video about Amazon just a few minutes ago, a few hours ago, because a subscriber told me some information and saying that Amazon was going to split its headquarters in Seattle in half, and basically 25,000 people would be pushed out of Seattle and going someplace else. That's not true. And I mentioned that in the reply back to him because, for one, if you're in this area, you know that Amazon is deeply entrenched into the area. It's not the only company of size here, it's the biggest. But you have other tech companies here. So the West Coast is always going to be the base for a lot of tech companies. It just always will be. It's very attractive for talent that comes from Asia and other places. And so, yeah, it's always going to pretty much be one of those places until something changes, right? That's not to say there's not a lot of tech talent in other cities, but as far as like big epicenters of it, Seattle and the Bay Area pretty much take that spot. So, with that said, I think that really and truly Amazon can keep expanding here if it wanted to. And I have no doubt that it actually will. And after reading some more additional information, I think that they're going to continue to do that. But first, let me talk about this particular issue involving Amazon and its HQ2 search. I did a video saying that Alexandria, Virginia is the place that has been rumored to be the place, the location. Now, Amazon caught a lot of flack here in Seattle as being too big, right? It's now Seattle's considered to be a company town because even though it's a big city, Amazon dominates. It has more office space more office space by square footage than any other company in America. It is the biggest. So with that said, Amazon does not own all of the buildings that you see. There are over a dozen buildings in South Lake Union that Amazon is a part of, but they don't own all of those buildings. There's some that they do own and that they built. The Spears is one example of that. But other buildings are built by developers such as the late Paul Allen, who owns the Trailblazers. He owned the Trailblazers and the Seahawks. He also owned a company called Vulcan, which is a real estate development company. So he's built a lot of the massive buildings you see in Seattle. But he's also built a lot of buildings for Amazon, and Amazon rents a lot of space down there. So many developers are building different buildings down there, and Amazon is leasing that space. South Lake Union used to just be a warehouse area. Not a lot going on down there, but it has quickly filled up. And as I mentioned in other videos, if you take just South Lake Union and you put it out in the middle of nowhere, it would look like a big city. I mean, there's so many glass towers and buildings. Literally, if you put it someplace else, it would look like a major city. I mean, that's just the truth. South Lake Union's downtown, or South Lake Union by itself, could look like a downtown of a city the size of Louisville or Cincinnati even. It's a pretty decent buildup, right? Some of those buildings are 20, 30, 40 stories tall. So it takes years to build these buildings, and they're pretty much modern marvels, if you will. It's not just a simple office building that gets built, but what actually goes into those buildings in terms of making them a tech hub is insane, right? It's insane. Amazon has expanded itself not only here in Seattle, but it's also expanded a little bit in Bellevue. They have worked out a deal with UW, and UW owns the land. A developer is building this massive skyscraper, and Amazon has leased the entire building, right? They also have taken over the huge Macy's downtown, which was at one time the biggest Macy's. Covers an entire city block, several stories tall, and they're taking all of the office portion of that for their employees. So they've actually not left, but they actually have a big gap between South Lake Union and where these other locations are in downtown Seattle. So they're spreading out. So when the subscriber mentioned that Amazon is going to cut the number of people in half, I just knew that couldn't be the case because Amazon's too entrenched. They have too many. It would cost them so much money that it would really, if they did that, not only would it cost them so much money in terms of leases and being sued, because if they take out all of those workers, those buildings are just going to sit empty. So they're going to be sued by their landlords. They're going to basically have a lot of people that don't want to move because, believe it or not, a lot of people like it here. So it just didn't make sense to me. Then they pointed me to a site. And so I looked it up at the Wall Street Journal, and then, of course, that wanted me to pay. So, I'm not going to pay. But I looked at other places, and even reading the part of the Wall Street Journal that I can see, it's not talking about HQ2, the original headquarters in Seattle at all. It has nothing to do with Seattle. HQ2 is possibly going to be split up into 2 different locations. Now, this is kind of the rumor. Now, Amazon hasn't officially said nothing. But there's a lot of rumor and speculation that Amazon could be split into 2. And I think Bezos understands what has happened in Seattle, the Seattle effect. 50,000 people is a lot of people for any city. 50,000 workers, even in New York, that's a big deal. And so you're putting all your eggs in one basket, again, because all of their eggs is kind of here. Now, they do have sites in many different places. They have in Vancouver, Canada, for example, they have opened up places there, in Atlanta, and many different places. So Amazon is entrenched kind of all over. And they spread out their talent, and they've done that very, very well. But they're wanting to not only have those different little satellite campuses, they want another big economic base. And given the fact that it has really put a huge surge in home prices here, and when you consider the amount of land that is needed, the amount of buildings that are needed, there's not a lot of other cities that can really do this, to be honest with you. Even places like Indianapolis, which they're going to use the old GM stamping plant, which is close to downtown, there's nothing over there, right? I know Indianapolis like the back of my hand. In that area, there's nothing over there. Indianapolis doesn't have any sort of mass transit. The cities that could really and truly absorb HQ2 in terms of just the size that it needs and do it very, very well are cities that are much smaller, like Columbus, Ohio, Indianapolis, Nashville. Those are cities I know very, very well. I lived in Indianapolis, went to Columbus several times, went to Nashville. I live close to Nashville, Tennessee. So I know these places. But none of them have good transportation. They rely on bus, and out of the 3, Indianapolis has the worst. So it doesn't make sense for a city, and these are small cities, to take on 50,000 people and you don't have a decent transportation system. So it'd have to be a city that has good transit, rail transit that can move large numbers of people. Denver didn't make sense because Denver is a small city. Austin's a small city. Austin doesn't have any mass transit either. So when you count those out, LA doesn't make sense either because it's on the same time zone. So when you go further to the east, and I cut out a lot of the cities in the Midwest because other than Chicago, it just doesn't make sense. Texas, Austin doesn't make sense, as I mentioned. Dallas makes sense. Houston is already out of it. Then it's pretty much looking at the south. Atlanta, which I thought would be a best choice, and Miami. Miami's in Hurricane Alley, so they're out. Then you have to basically consider the Northeast. The Northeast is complicated because there's so many places that make good sense, and the people already pay an arm and a leg for mortgages and rent anyway. So it's not like it's culture shock. You know, if you put HQ2 in any of these other cities I mentioned prior to this, it's going to be massive culture shock. Because even in places like Dallas, which houses are pricey, it's a city that has sprawled out. So, I mean, it's a massive city. All of these other cities have they sprawl out. And in the Midwest, same thing. But when you get up to the Northeast, it's not really that way. I mean, they're big. Philadelphia is massive, but they can't get any bigger in terms of spreading out. So prices for land is much more expensive. Finding available land is much harder. Same for New York, Boston, all of those other, DC, it's more expensive. So I think that Amazon is taken a lot of that into consideration, and there's rumors that they're going to choose 2 locations for HQ2. So instead of having Seattle as a hub and HQ2 someplace else as a hub, they're now thinking about having actually 3 hubs. That's 2 fingers. 3 hubs. Seattle being as big as it is in terms of its original headquarters, nothing's happening there. But then choosing 2 other places to have their HQ2. Now, the rumor is someplace in New York, like Brooklyn or something, and then down in DC. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the case or not, but that's kind of what the rumor mill all over the press is saying, is that it's going to be split up into 2 different locations, and they're choosing New York and DC. Now, what I said in the video that I made that I didn't publish, DC makes sense because obviously he owns a newspaper there. He owns a massive house there. So that makes sense. And also it's close to politics. There's been a whole lot of stuff, politically that's been going against Bezos. Even on the local level, he had to deal with that here. And then when you go, now it's national level, the president's even talking about him. So I think that it's kind of a situation of, okay, let's not put all of our eggs in one basket. Let's not take that gamble of 50,000 people in one location that we actually need and split it up. If that's the case, it would be 25,000 employees in New York. Let's say New York is chosen, and 25,000 people in DC. Let's say that DC is chosen. That's how they're splitting this up. It's not that they're taking half from Seattle and then putting it into another location. No. The workers here have an option if they want to move and relocate, sure, if it's available. And then, of course, crew leaders. Now, this is what Amazon said before, that crew leaders, the people that make choices and decisions, can move their teams if they want to. That's common. I've actually had a company that split up and did that before, and folks are given an option if they want to actually go or stay or what have you, or you're sometimes voluntold and you have to. So that could definitely be the case as well. When you think about it, DC has, and New York, both of them have at least two major airports, and they're known around the world. So they fit, and it makes sense. DC, of course, has 2 major airports. New York City has 3 major airports, and they both have great metro systems. You can pretty much pick anywhere in New York and it's going to look like a downtown, right? Even in Brooklyn, where you don't see a whole lot of high rises, it's still, you can walk out and go to a corner store or a shop or whatever, go to plenty of eateries. So it makes sense there. The part of DC that they're looking at, it makes sense too. Again, I looked up Alexandria and Crystal City, all those places, and it makes sense, right? It's not like people have to, hail a bus down that comes every 30 minutes like they would in Indianapolis and then let it take them over to downtown, and then they walk around and then they have to hurry back because it takes another 30 minutes to get there. Literally. This is literally a true metro system that both cities have, DC and in New York. So it makes sense to me. But if this does happen, which I think it's probably this makes better sense. It makes better sense for them to split it up into 2 different locations as far as HQ2 is concerned, because it would be a lot more, it's less land and infrastructure that a city has to actually develop and come up with. It spreads the talent a lot more. So instead of just holding out 50,000 people in one city, which is hard, they don't have to reach as many people. And it takes the time for that to build up. Sure, there are buildings that exist in DC that supposedly, there's a lot of real estate companies that pulled properties off of the for sale list so that they can actually have it potentially for Amazon. There are already buildings that are kind of move-in ready, and Amazon can kind of retool those over a year or so and actually get them up to what they need for them to be. and they can start moving workers in. So getting to even 25,000 people is going to take years to actually do. And of course, it's also going to have to need to be new structures no matter where they go. New buildings have to be built for Amazon, period. There's not enough old buildings that they're going to be interested in that exist. That's just kind of how they've always operated. They like to be unique. They like to be different. If you come to Seattle, you'll see what I'm talking about. The buildings look like they're space aged, to be honest with you. It just looks, it blends in with the city because the city has a lot of glass buildings now. I mean, one of the buildings that were built downtown looks like one of the buildings in Hong Kong when I went. The HSBC building, I believe. It looks like that. It's just such a weird angled building. It's beautiful. So it doesn't stand out too weirdly, but the buildings just look very futuristic, to be honest with you. And Seattle looks kind of futuristic. Do I think that Amazon's going to invest in other places too? Yeah. I think Amazon wants to spread itself as far as it can in many different places so that if something were to happen and regulations come, that cities would say, don't touch Amazon because they're helping our economy. You know, if you're in one city and you go after Amazon, that one city will complain and people kind of look over it. The rest of the country will say whatever. But when you're in 50, 60 different cities all over, in Canada, the United States, and possibly even other places, then people start to complain whenever regulations start to come in. It just makes sense. So if he starts to put little bitty locations, little tiny places where there's 500 or 1,500 people in different cities, that's a big deal. For a place like Nashville to have 1,500 Amazon workers, what city is going to say no to that? If they come to Tacoma and they put in 250 people, still, Tacoma would be happy about that, right? Because Amazon pays their office workers really good. Some people that they don't pay pretty good, but a lot of their office workers, they pay really good. So if they have 50, 60 different locations where they've done that, they've done it in Boston, they've done it in Atlanta, they've done it in Philly, in different places. So they have all these different little locations, plus they have 2 hubs, one in DC where they can be close to politics, and one in New York because it's the center of the universe. Then there's less likely of a chance for regulations to always be put onto Amazon because it will affect a whole large number of people all over the country. Who knows? I, again, could be completely, utterly wrong. And all of these publications that are saying that it could be 3 actual sites for headquarters is probably, they could be wrong as well. Who knows? We just have to see. I do know that Amazon will be making a decision soon, hopefully. Again, I thought before this whole HQ2 thing is probably not real. But it looks like that it will be happening, and it looks like it's going to be more than just one location for its HQ2. It's going to be actually 2 locations, and I guess they're both going to be called HQ2. Don't know. Anyhow, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure that you share, like, and subscribe. And until next time, I will see you. Take care.